So good afternoon and welcome to today's Uplift with Vision. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Reverend Jeanne and I'm just so happy to share this time with you and just grateful that we do have this opportunity to come together heart to heart through the miracle of technology. So as always, we begin in prayer. I just invite you to settle in and just take a deep breath. This is the day the Lord has made. And I am just so grateful for this day, for this opportunity to be in this life, this divine life, this perfect life of God. Knowing that all is perfectly ordained, perfectly presented, perfectly expressed. For we live in that divine life, that divine story of God fully expressed here and now. And I know that in this, there is only good. There is only this perfection. And so I relax into it. So grateful for this day, for this time, for this place. Knowing that all is good, for all is God, and so it is. So this month's focus has been Holy, Holy Uprising. And the topic this week is boldly living a new story. Boldly living a new story. So these days I've been reflecting on the many stories that we tell about ourselves and about our world, right? You know, change is in the air as the pandemic begins to lift and businesses and restaurants and even churches are opening up. It makes me wonder what story will be carried into this new open future. And will we boldly step into it, living a new story? Well, I think first we need to look at what story we have been living before we can choose another. You know, we have all kinds of stories. Some are factual, some are fill in the blank stories, make believe stories, stories about ourselves and stories about other people, whether we know them or not. We can make up stories, people in line at the grocery store or from their Facebook page, right? We have stories, plenty of them. So what are some of your favorite narratives? You know, one of the simplest ways to identify that is by looking at what story we tell ourselves in times of change, right? Whether it's starting a new job or business, trying to change a habit, leaving something, or even burning the toast, we tell ourselves a story about it, don't we? We might be the hero, the victim, the wrongdoer, the innocent bystander, or just the observer of the story. And of course, our best stories are when we're the hero, but more often we're feeling like we're the victim. You know, many of our stories stop us from being able to accomplish what we set out to do. We focus on our smallness, our excuses, our past failings to tell us who we are and what is possible. You know, those are stories that do not serve us. They limit us, and yet we cling to them. Fred Luskin, in his book, Forgive for Good, suggests this. He says, if you can view your mind as your house, it can teach you to control how much space you rent to your wounds and your grievances. You are the proprietor, and you set the rent. So think about it. How much space are you renting to house your old story of not enoughness or not lovable or too old to change? So many stories and so much wasted space, right? So what would it take to boldly live a new story? Well, I think the first thing it would require is for us to give up a lot of what we've been telling ourselves most of our lives. But if we do that, then who are we? Right? I mean, think about it. If you give up all your attachments and beliefs and control of your stories, who would we be? And then how do we create something new? Well, I believe there are 3 spiritual practices that support and lead us into boldly living a new life. There's the practice of gratitude, the practice of surrender, and the practice of service. Now, I could talk forever on these 3 key points, but instead, and since we are talking about stories, I'm going to share a fable that is a great example of the power of those 3 practices. It comes from Thailand, and it's the story about a Buddha and a homeless man. It's quite lengthy, so just settle in. So there was once a homeless man who spent his days trying to gather food, but he kept noticing that every night his extra food would disappear. One day he caught the mouse that had been stealing his food, and he asked him, "Why are you stealing from me? I'm a homeless man. You can steal from richer people than me, and it won't have any effect on them." And the mouse responded, telling the homeless man, "It's your destiny. It's your destiny that you can only have 8 items in your possession, no matter how much you beg, no matter how much you gather. 8 items are all you're able to have." And of course, the homeless man was shocked. And he said, "Well, why is that my destiny?" And the mouse just said, "I don't know. You should go ask the Buddha." So that's what the homeless man did. He went on a journey to find the Buddha. On the first night, he ended up at a wealthy family's home and asked to stay the night. And they let him in and asked, "Well, why are you traveling so late?" And he answered, "Well, I have a question for the Buddha, and tomorrow I'm on my way to see him." And the family said, "Well, can we give you a question to ask the Buddha? We have a 16-year-old daughter who can't speak, and we want to know what we have to do to have her speak." And the homeless man tells him, "Of course, I'll ask your question for you, and thank you for the shelter." So the next morning, he continues his journey, and he sees a great mountain range that he has to cross. And he climbs the first of many mountains, and there he meets a wizard. And the wizard asks, "Well, where are you going, and why are you deciding to cross the mountains?" And the young man says, "I'm going to ask the Buddha a question about my destiny." And the wizard said, "Well, would you please ask him a question for me? I've been trying to go to heaven for 1,000 years. And according to my teaching, I should be get to heaven. I should be in heaven now. Can you please ask the Buddha, what do I have to do to get to heaven?" And the young man agrees. He says, "Of course, I'll ask your question for you." And the wizard uses his staff to fly them across the mountain range. As the young man continues his journey, he runs into his last obstacle, which is a river that he cannot cross. But luckily, he meets a giant turtle who decides to take them across the river. As they're crossing, the turtle asks the young man where he's going. And the young man answers, "I'm going to see the Buddha. I'm going to go ask him a question about my destiny." And the turtle says, "Would you please ask a question for me? I've been trying to become a dragon for 500 years. And according to my teaching, I should have become a dragon by now. Can you please ask the Buddha what I have to do in order to become a dragon? So the young man thanks the turtle for taking him across the river and says, of course, I'll ask a question for you. So the homeless man finally reaches the temple where the Buddha is. And there's a crowd gathered. And the Buddha tells everyone, I will answer 3 questions from everyone here, but only 3 questions. And the young man is shocked. He has 4 questions. So he thinks carefully. He thinks about the turtle who's been living for 500 years trying to become a dragon, the wizard who has been living for 1,000 years trying to get to heaven, and then that young girl who's going to have to live her whole life being unable to speak. And then he looks at himself and he says, I'm only a homeless beggar. I can go back home and continue begging. As he looks at everyone else's problems, his problems suddenly seem so small. He felt sorry for the turtle and the wizard and the young girl. And so he decided to ask their 3 questions. And here's what the Buddha answered. The turtle is unwilling to leave the shell. As long as he won't leave its comfort, he will never become a dragon. The wizard always carries his staff and never puts it down, and it acts as an anchor, keeping him from heaven. And as for the girl, she'll be able to speak when she meets her soulmate. So the homeless man bows to the Buddha and went back on his journey home. He reunites with the turtle and he tells him, the Buddha says you just have to take off your shell and you'll become a dragon. So the turtle takes off his shell, and inside are priceless pearls found in the deepest parts of the ocean. He gives the pearls to the homeless man and says, thank you, I no longer need these because now I'm a dragon. And he flies away. The homeless man reunites with the wizard on the top of the mountain. And he says, you just have to put down your staff and you'll be able to go to heaven. The wizard gives the staff to the young man and says, thank you, as he ascends to heaven. So now the young man has the wealth from the turtle and the power from the wizard. And he goes back to the family that gave him shelter. And he tells them, the Buddha says your daughter will be able to speak when she meets her soulmate. At that moment, the daughter comes downstairs and says, oh, are you the man who was here last week? The young girl and the once homeless man have found their soulmates and their destiny in each other. The end. So this story tells us so many things, so many lessons. But so how does it relate to boldly living a new story? Well, let's look at those 3 spiritual practices again. The practice of gratitude, the practice of service, and the practice of surrender. So gratitude starts with appreciating the life that you've lived, grateful for all of the stories you've created. In this story, the young man begins homeless and is only concerned about keeping the food that he's gathered. But once he accepts a task, a purpose, to question his destiny, he stops worrying about what he didn't have and begins appreciating what he did have, and then winds up getting everything he needed, right? So how often do we get so caught up in our day-to-day struggles that we forget to give thanks for the gift of the life we have, for our past and all that we've become. Living in gratitude for what is is the place where we can begin to create a bold new story, because we're firmly planted in the now. And then there's service. As the story shows, in order to find true love, we must become someone who is willing to put others before ourselves. Right? We're willing to lend a hand to those struggling more than us, willing to help them. If we do that, we can change the course of our lives, our very destiny. And spirit responds in ways we never would have imagined. Right? And finally, there's surrender. Surrendering to the past and accepting the new. You know, if we want to become a dragon, or whatever our ideal vision is, we must be willing to leave behind what makes us most comfortable, what makes us feel most safe. We must leave our comfort zone, just like the turtle did. Ernest Holmes writes in the Science of Mind textbook, never limit your view of life by any past experience. The possibility of life is inherent within the capacity to imagine what life is, backed by the power to produce this imagery or divine imagination. I'll read that one more time. Never limit your view of life by any past experience. The possibility of life is inherent within the capacity to imagine what life is, backed by the power to produce this imagery or divine imagination. What's that idea? It's inherent within the capacity to imagine. So in other words, we don't have to be stuck in our story. We can simply imagine a new one. Life is eternally filled with possibilities for a new and better and different story. We have the power to rewrite, to reinterpret, to reinvent ourselves and our lives. You know, remember, we have at our core the same power that keeps the planets in orbit, the sun shining, the grass growing. And it is breathing itself as each of us every moment. As Ernest Holmes reminds us, our opportunities are unlimited. There is a divine urge to express that permeates and fills all space and all people. So here's my invitation to you. This week, take some time to look at the story that you're creating for yourself. See if you can add some gratitude, some service, some surrender to it. It will help you to boldly live a new story. So let's ground all this in prayer. Just settling in again to this moment, this time, this story. Just recognizing the divine right here, just feeling that gratitude, feeling that surrender, moving into service of the divine right here and now. For this is the movement of life. This is the movement of our life. This is our purpose and our destiny, and we embrace it wholeheartedly right here and now. And I'm just so grateful for this, knowing that all is in divine order, that we are led and provided for within each and every moment, with each step that we take. There is God, and there is good, and all is well. And so I allow it to be, and so it is. So thank you for joining me today. And don't forget to tune in on Friday for another Uplift with Vision. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Namaste.